the release of Deadpool Wolverine ever so imminent, I figured now's a pretty good time to drop a ranking of every single film in the X-Men franchise. Film's run for 20 years, and it's had some ups and it's had some downs. And now, without further ado, let's get into the ranking. But before we get there, I want to clarify, this is just my ranking. This is my personal opinion. You have your own opinion, and that's awesome. You should drop that down below in the comments, and I would love to see how our opinions differ. So go ahead, tell me why I'm wrong, tell me why I'm right. Tell me whatever you think about this franchise in general. So go ahead, drop a like and a comment below, and if you want to see more stuff like this, feel free to subscribe to the channel. In dead last, we have Dark Phoenix. Now, when this film originally came out, I didn't totally hate it, but rewatching it now, I don't love it. I've seen it at least 3 times now, and every time I remember, yeah, this is an eyesore. Starting with the costumes. You had the best costumes in any X-Men film at the very end of X-Men Apocalypse. And why wouldn't you just bring that over? But no, we had to go for these Party City looking pieces of crap. I mean, even Quicksilver's goggles looks like he won them with a couple of tickets at Chuck E. Cheese. And it's not just the costumes, even the makeup isn't all that good. I mean, just look at Mystique. You can tell Jennifer Lawrence did not want to be in this movie at all. The evolution of her makeup throughout each film is progressively worse with each passing entry, and this one, she clearly just wanted them to do the bare minimum so it looked just okay and she could just get out because she was done. Hence why she's not in the movie past the halfway point. But seriously, the character in and of itself is just at her most unlikable with all these weird poke the bear comments she's making toward Charles, who's kind of being deconstructed in this film for no reason.
I can't actually remember the last time you were the one risking something. And by the way, the women are always saving the men around here. You might want to think about changing the name to X-Women.
And the reason I'm saying it's probably Jennifer Lawrence's enthusiasm that influenced the look of Mystique in this film is because it's clearly not the fault of the makeup artist. I mean, if it was, Beast wouldn't look nearly as good. Nightcrawler wouldn't look nearly as good. There are characters in here who look convincing and consistent with how they've appeared in past movies, and Mystique is the only one who's changed, and shocker, Jennifer Lawrence was dragged back against her will, basically. But hey, at least Magneto's cool. He's about the only interesting character in the entire film. Jean Grey is supposed to be the main character, but they kind of forget about her after the halfway point. They try to do something interesting with her dad that isn't all that interesting, but it could have been. They just chose to make it really boring and weird. Jessica Chastain plays Vuk, I think, the leader of the Debari, the not Skrulls. They were supposed to be Skrulls, and then Disney said, we're making a movie this year, and you can't use those characters. But they didn't have a problem with the X-Men universe using Quicksilver while they were using him in Age of Ultron, so you do the mental gymnastics on that one. Overall, I remember thinking that this film was not terrible when I watched it the first time, but definitely not that good. But upon rewatch, it's evident this is the worst of the X-Men series. In the number 13 spot, we have New Mutants. A film I liked the first 2 times I watched it, but upon rewatch, I thought to myself, why do I like this again? It's honestly not one that I was quick to defend or say this is amazing and misunderstood. No, this was just something that I was like, yeah, for what it was going for, it wasn't all that bad. But I think this just came out at a time where nothing else was in the theater, and it was finally out. I was glad it came out. It was only like 90 minutes, so it didn't like take up too much of my time. And I was like, yeah, it was all right. And I liked Anya Taylor-Joy in it, but it really just hasn't aged well at all. And it wasn't even that good. It's not a good X-Men film. It's not even a good comic book film. I don't even know what kind of film it is because it started out as this smaller scale, claustrophobic horror movie character study piece, almost like The Breakfast Club with a comic book element and horror aspects in it too. But then by the end of it, it just becomes another CG, third act, big bombastic blockbuster action set piece. And so it kind of just feels disingenuous to what it set out to originally do, and that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. This film went through some serious development hell. I remember the first trailer coming out when I was in high school, and it didn't actually hit theaters until I was a sophomore in college. This unbelievable production, rewrite, reshoot, rehash. At one point it was deemed unreleasable, so they had to do a lot of other work on it. Josh Boone at one point said he was going to be setting up for a horror X-Men trilogy, and maybe that all got left on the chopping block, and that's why it didn't do so well. Maybe he had a vision that we're just never going to see. much like Josh Trank with the Fantastic Four movie from 2015. But overall, it's just really hard to see what the point of this was even. Anya Taylor-Joy is at least good as Magic. Maisie Williams is decent as Wolfsbane. The guy who plays Sunspot and Cannonball, I mean, they were fine. The guy from Stranger Things as Cannonball was cool. Honestly, seeing him in this film made me think, that guy could play Scooter in a Borderlands movie.
I started panicking. People got hurt.
Oh, crap. Is you Hyperion? I heard all of you were robots and you eat metal out the garbage and stuff.
And then you have Alice Braga, who's playing Dr. Reyes and actually trying, but it's not really all that great either, at least in the writing department. Danny Moonstar is the supposed protagonist of this film. I don't know if that's really a fair assessment of her character. She's there. She's scared. Does she overcome something by the end? Yeah, I guess. Is it that great of an arc? Not really. It's just funny because she's supposed to have this tragic emotional backstory, but at the very start, her dad wakes her up and is just like, "You have to run as fast as you can! Wait! Don't let go of my hand!" It just didn't work. Much like this movie. In the number 12 spot, we have Once Upon a Deadpool. And this is in the bottom 3 for a myriad of reasons, but the biggest one being Deadpool doesn't work in PG-13. He just doesn't. The question I had after rewatching this film was, who was this even for? Because it's a PG-13 film, so that means it's trying to reach a wider age range, meaning younger kids potentially. But these younger kids aren't old enough to have seen the first film, which did not get a PG-13 rating. I'm probably overthinking it. It's not that big of a deal, but at the same time, it's just really hard to know who the audience is for this because it's clearly not geared at an exclusively mature audience, and it's clearly not geared for a younger audience either. This was clearly just a move by Disney executives to make money and also see, hey, if we bring Deadpool into the MCU, can he work in a PG-13 setting? The answer is no. Why is the answer no? Because when you have Deadpool, or at least in this context, maybe it would work in a different, just a PG-13 version of Deadpool, like a full film that was meant to be PG-13. Maybe you could make that work. However, the problem with this one, all the Fred Savage stuff, that's all fine and dandy. It's funny. The Princess Bride references are a nice nostalgic trip. And the censoring himself with the remote, that was funny too. However, when they're showing the actual film, it's just a nerfed version of the film. It's not like they made a movie that was intended to be PG-13. It was an R-rated film that had its wings clipped. So all the blood and gore from the original cut, it's not there. Why? Because they can't show it. And then the profanity obviously has to be edited out too, but instead of what would have been creative if they had Deadpool's arm reach forward like he was watching it and beep whenever someone said a bad word, instead they're just dubbing over it in the most obvious way possible so their lips aren't matching what they're saying, and it's just frustrating.
It's like watching The Breakfast Club on TBS.
So yeah, it really isn't a good version of this film. It's probably the least likely to be rewatched for me personally if I was doing an X-Men rewatch. But at the same time, it reminds me of a Deadpool 2 story, which I do like, and that's why it's at least above both Dark Phoenix and New Mutants. In the number 11 spot, we have X-Men Apocalypse. This is a film that I defended for a very, very long time and would always say people are overhating on this one. In fact, at one point, when I saw this in the theater on opening night with all my friends when I was 15 years old, I thought, this is the best X-Men film ever made. I did not hold that belief very long after initially seeing it, but I did think it was at least good, or at least better than most of the X-Men movies. Now I can't help but just shake my head at why I ever thought that, because yeah, this is just not it. It's not a bad movie. It's just not a good one. It's okay at best, in my opinion. You have way too much going on here. There's way too many characters. There's so many subplots. It's not even funny because now you're developing all these younger X-Men. You're continuing the First Class team. Mystique is, for whatever reason, way more important than she's ever been in this franchise before, and Jennifer Lawrence couldn't care any less, which is why she's hardly ever in the blue makeup, and when she is, it's clearly not as good as it was in Days of Future Past, and like I said, it only gets worse in Dark Phoenix. The inclusion of Nightcrawler, fleshing out Quicksilver more, giving Magneto a family and revamping his arc so he's bad again. And then we have to tackle Apocalypse on top of all that. Oh, and by the way, Stryker's going to show up randomly for some reason. It's all just so convoluted, and it did not need to be this ridiculous. Oscar Isaac, I love the guy. He's such a good actor. He is the wrong actor to play Apocalypse. He tried his best. It didn't work. At least, not for me. Honestly, if Michael Clark Duncan was alive at the time, he would have been the perfect Apocalypse. He is physically imposing. He has that deep baritone voice. Him in the makeup would have been perfection. Oscar Isaac kind of looks like a clown or a Power Rangers villain. It's really weird. And he does this weird, whispery, almost Voldemort sounding voice. Props for trying something, buddy, but it just doesn't work. Psylocke is probably the most forgettable and shoehorned in character in this entire film. It's really a shame because we've been waiting for Psylocke for a very, very long time. Angel finally shows up for the first time since X-Men Last Stand, and wow, that was bad. Seeing Storm get her white hair from Apocalypse and Professor X going bald for the same reason felt really forced, and kind of like Han Solo getting his last name from an Imperial officer and getting the DL-44 dumped into his lap.
Who are your people? I don't have people. I'm alone. Solo.
The Wolverine cameo was probably one of my favorite parts about this whole thing, but there is literally no reason for that in the film whatsoever, because if you remove all of William Stryker, nothing changes. The X-Men get kidnapped, they break out Wolverine, and then they leave. Why is the movie 20 minutes longer than it needs to be? Right now, this is the longest X-Men film in the franchise, and it just didn't earn that runtime. Again, I don't hate it, I don't mind rewatching it, it's just not nearly as good as it should have been, especially with Apocalypse, a villain people have been wanting for a very long time to make his live-action debut. Coming in at number 10, we have X-Men Origins Wolverine, and this is a film that I have softened on with time. Initially, I remember being a kid and wanting to see this film so bad, and I never did get to see it in the theater, and then time went on before I finally did see it, and by that time I think I was kind of exposed to the internet cynicism surrounding it, and that kind of impacted my enjoyment of the film as like a 10, 11-year-old or however old I was when I saw it. The frustrating part about this is, of course, just how contradictory it is to the X-Men franchise. In many aspects, it could have worked really well, but quite frankly, it didn't answer any questions that we wanted answered. We didn't need to know that Wolverine's name came from some weird chick that he was dating who betrayed him and gave some weird fable about a trickster or something in the moon, and I don't know. We wanted elaboration with what happened with Stryker and anything that could surround that, and they did that, but also they retconned a lot that was established in X-Men 2. Instead of this taking place in 1989, which would make sense based on how Stryker said it's been 15 years, and the movie canonically takes place in 2004, we're going back 25 years into 1979 because apparently we got to capitalize on that Vietnam nostalgia or something. I don't know. The task force that they had and that they were a part of, both Logan and Sabretooth, was really interesting. And honestly, that whole opening sequence with the credits was way cooler than I would have ever thought it would be. And it's a really good hook for the film. And every time I rewatch this, I'm like, man, maybe this is going to be a lot better than I remember. And maybe this is a pretty cool movie. And then we get to the rest of it, and it's just nonsense. Wolverine's CG claws just look horrible. The fact that all these characters are just getting taken out by Victor, why? What's his motivation? Why does he do this? It is never explained, and then they just kind of team up at the end, buddy, no big deal, sorry about that, bro, I was killing all your friends. Huh? There's Gambit. I guess. Would have been cooler to see him with the X-Men for once. But of course, the one thing that everyone remembers about this film is Weapon 11, or what was supposed to be Deadpool. You're telling me you thought that was better than that? But seriously, the Deadpool look, honestly, it actually looks a lot better than some of the concept art they had for it, which is really saying something. But yeah, it doesn't work. Sewing his mouth shut. I mean, everyone's joked to the moon and back about that. And the swords coming out of his hands like Wolverine claws were just, it was horrible. It was really bad, and I'm glad that Deadpool went back in time and killed that thing.
Hey!
In the number 9 slot, we have X-Men The Last Stand, another film that I actually defended pretty hard for a long time before finally caving and admitting, okay, it's not that good. I understand. There's aspects of it that I can still appreciate. I can still rewatch it. And even though it's a convoluted mess, I still get a lot more enjoyment out of it than most of these other X-Men films, at least the ones below it. I don't know. I like Kelsey Grammer as Beast, I guess. He was literally just the best casting decision they could have made for that character at the time, and I'm really bummed we never saw more of him outside of one brief appearance in Days of Future Past. The inclusion of Kitty Pryde was cool. I just thought that the love triangle between her, Bobby, and Rogue was kind of weird, especially because Bobby's just kind of openly toying with her emotions while also not wanting to break away from Rogue. It's just a weird dynamic they have there. And it's really all that fuels Rogue's character in the entire film. But there's so much going on with this. You have the mutant cure advocates and the war that Magneto is waging on them. Dark Phoenix's storyline being crammed in here. And you have a bunch of other new characters who run all these different subplots that just don't mesh with the whole overall thing, and some of them just fall by the wayside, like Angel. What was the point of him? He's in maybe 2 scenes? I thought he was at least going to team up with the X-Men. He shows up, and they're just like, nah, man, this ain't a school anymore. Get lost. Oh, okay, cool. It's really a shame that Scott had to get taken out like that. I mean, they literally had no idea what to do with him, and yeah, that's how they handle him. Now, granted, he wasn't available for a lot of it because he was making Superman Returns with Bryan Singer, which is also why he didn't come back to direct. But it's a shame that the supposed leader of the X-Men literally didn't have nearly as much character development in the first 2 films, and when you bring along a 3rd film where we could actually see them working as a unit and this happening, he's too depressed because of Jean's death, and so we just kill him off. Cool. Juggernaut, Vinnie Jones, I'm glad there's memes, but that's really all I'm glad about. But overall, X-Men The Last Stand, nothing I can't stomach, but I don't know, not amazing, I guess. At number 8, we have the original X-Men film. And I want to make clear, every film at this level and above is a film that I really, really like. This is a really underrated film in my opinion, and it doesn't get talked about enough. This brought us the X-Men for the first time, and kind of came in a time where superhero movies weren't all that popular yet. We had Batman, we had Superman, and we had Blade, but we didn't have this. And this obviously has more of that 2000s style and influence on it, hence why they're all wearing leather suits instead of iconic yellow spandex as they joke about in the film.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
I will say, I wish the film didn't just focus on Wolverine, Rogue, Professor X, and Magneto. I wish it was about the X-Men as a team. Because, as I mentioned before, Scott doesn't really get any time to shine, and yet in the comics and in the animated series, he is the leader of the team. We never really feel that. In fact, the relationship he has with Jean is more so told to us and not really explored all that well. Jean has plenty of exchanges with Wolverine, but not really many with Cyclops. We're just told, hey, they're together. Believe that. Okay, sure. Rogue has an interesting story. I still feel like Anna Paquin, even though I love Anna Paquin, it is almost night and day, the difference between her in the comics and the animated series versus this. She's a lot more reserved, she's really shy, and Rogue has always just been one who's just super outgoing and, you know, kind of got this electric personality. Yes. And I know I'm kind of nitpicking right now when I said this is a really underrated film, but these are the things that come to mind. Now, what I love about this film is just how it characterizes all these different characters. You have the dichotomy between Professor X and Magneto is so well written in this film, it is awesome. I think my favorite scene with him is when he's surrounded by police and he takes all their guns, turns them on them, and the one guy, he pulls the trigger on the gun and then keeps the bullet like an inch from his forehead and then starts digging it in. That is just... Whoever came up with that was brilliant. It was just such a good scene. I loved it so much. It is cool seeing the X-Men work as a team in the third act, but it does take a while to actually get there. Again, I really like this film, and it's always a joy to rewatch because of the Magneto and Professor X dynamic and Logan and his introduction to the team. But it's lower on this list just because of everything I mentioned and the fact that we don't really get to experience the X-Men as a operational unit just yet. At number 7, we have X2, X-Men United. A lot of people would consider this one their favorite in the franchise, and I think it's really good too. Don't get me wrong. I think this is a solid film, and it may seem a little low on the list, but it's not because this film is necessarily bad, just because the ones above it are just that much better in my opinion. This film starts out strong, with a brainwashed Nightcrawler attempting to assassinate the president in one of the coolest action sequences in any comic book film ever made. Again, Magneto is a standout, being both a villain and an anti-hero as he teams up with Professor X and the X-Men, and by the end of the film, to take on the big bad threat, which is none other than William Stryker, who has this truly personal connection to Wolverine, of which we learn more about, and then would go on to retcon in X-Men Origins Wolverine, so... Whatever, we have this movie, right? Brian Cox plays Stryker very well. That was the right call for that character. I think he worked really, really well. Lady Deathstrike as his muscle was pretty cool too. Again, Scott kind of gets shafted. He's like kidnapped at one point in the film, and we don't see him again until the third act when he's brainwashed and whatnot. It's really frustrating just how underutilized Scott Summers is in this trilogy, in this franchise overall. We get more of Iceman in this film and his relationship with Rogue, but even cooler than that is Pyro. His inclusion was really awesome, just seeing the dynamic between him and Bobby on screen, but also the scene where he has an exchange with Magneto over his powers and what his name is and what his real name is. That was just such a well-written scene.
What's your name? John. What's your real name, John? Pyro.
It made sense why he would eventually go to Magneto's side in the future film.
You know all those dangerous mutants you hear about on the news?
I'm the worst one.
And also, it's going to be super awesome to see him in Deadpool and Wolverine.
God, I love this part.
The number 6 spot, again, this might seem a little lower than it should be, but I assure you the ones above it I just love that much more. X-Men First Class. And this is a much needed wake-up call for the franchise after the double whammy disappointment that was The Last Stand followed by X-Men Origins Wolverine. This film had brilliant direction brought to you by Matthew Vaughn, a repurposed script from the X-Men Origins Magneto film that was canceled, and it felt like an X-Men film. It had the yellow and blue elements in the costumes and everything. You had this younger team, the First Class. You got to see a lot of the characters that you're already familiar with in a younger setting, so you get to re-experience this different part of their lives. The dynamic between Professor X and Magneto, again, is what really sells the film, as it did with many of the other films in the past. But Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy just know what they're doing with these characters, and it works so well on screen. Jennifer Lawrence, this is her first time playing Mystique, and this is when she actually cared about the character and was not bad. They made the character relatable, sympathetic, and had reasonable motivations. She was given more depth in this film than she had in the first three, and I think that was a good choice. Beast, I think, might have been my favorite character in the film, though, just because Nicholas Holt's performance was so great, and he has this kind of nerdy Clark Kent nature about him. But then when he's in his full-on Beast form, the makeup just looks... it looks pretty cool. The one thing I will say is Moira McTaggart is such a weird character to me, because in the comics she's always been a scientist, and in here she's a CIA operative. Okay. Whatever. Again, kind of breaking continuity because we had Moira McTaggart in X-Men The Last Stand in a small role, and here she is completely younger in the 60s, and how do these characters relate to each other? It's never really clarified. Yeah, this is just one of those films that I revisit and I remember, man, this one is really freaking good, and I'm never disappointed by it any time I watch it. I will say, I really wish we could have seen that Magneto suit come back again because that was pure perfection. Coming in at number 5, we have Deadpool 2. And I also did happen to watch the Super Duper Cut, which is the unrated version of the film. So I watched 3 different versions of the same movie. Yeah, that was great. I will say though, I think the super duper cut is the definitive form of this film, and it's pretty obvious that's what David Leitch wanted to make from the start. I mean, the film is 13 minutes longer than the original, but it's enough to give the film time to breathe. There's a lot that I realized going back to the theatrical cut of the film that is just really rushed. Some things just don't linger as long as they should, and a lot of the dialogue seems choppy. There's actually quite a considerable amount that was cut out that is in the unrated cut, and I really don't understand why they didn't just leave it in, unless 20th Century Fox was hounding him about a 2-hour runtime. But I am glad that this unrated cut exists because this is the better version of the film overall. There's a lot that they changed with Russell's introduction. For example, in the theatrical cut, we have him just first appear when the X-Men fly into the orphanage. But in the unrated cut, we actually get to see him be introduced in a completely different way. Instead of just getting a flashback to when he was dropped off, we see him get dropped off. We see him meet this headmaster guy and interact with the orderlies and whatnot and be tortured in that device. It's not just a quick glimpse just to make you care about the character. Okay, there it is, now care. No, we actually get to experience that with him. And even though he is kind of annoying, and that is one of the biggest drawbacks to his character, is just how unfunny I guess he is, it was at least nice to see his origin. Now, there's a couple of things in this unrated cut that aren't in the theatrical cut that it's not that big of a deal because most of it's just banter and dialogue that's humorous. But I will say that they put more time into certain scenes. There's just stuff that needed to linger a little longer. The hook right away with Deadpool taking out all these criminals across the globe, that was what I kind of want an entire Deadpool movie to be about. Because that montage of him taking out goons, that is Deadpool at his core. In the comics, that's what he does. I don't really want this huge end of the world stake or anything, and I get that the stakes were a little bit smaller on this one, but at the same time, when you throw in Cable and make him make his whole arc about we need to do this, otherwise my reality is going to be whatever, then you're adding a little bit too big of a size to this story. I will say Cable was really cool, but they didn't really do his whole backstory all that much justice, much like Fred Savage jokes about in the PG-13 version of the film. A lot of the jokes in this film, I think, just don't land that well. They're not really all that funny, and most often they involve Weasel in some capacity, and if they're not involving Weasel, they involve Fire Fist.
I need to be selfless.
Yeah, but what does that mean?
It means I'm gonna save Russell. Maybe I couldn't save Vanessa, but maybe I can save a robust teenager from New Zealand.
Yeah, but what I mean is that word, selfless. I literally don't know what that means.
The humor is a little bit overcooked, and my least favorite part of this entire film is when Cable walks in the room and Deadpool, Domino, Weasel, and Doppender all take turns making a joke about what he just said. Don't do that. Make Deadpool the funny guy. You don't need everyone to be the funny guy, because at that point, Deadpool has no unique feature. That said, I do find a lot of this film really funny, and the action directed by David Leitch is really, really great. I love how so much of his style comes to the forefront. I love the blending of the music in certain scenes, and I will say I gotta give props to the unrated cut for putting in Fly Like an Eagle as they charge into battle in the third act, as opposed to whatever garbage rap song they were playing in the theatrical cut. I will not forgive the Fighting Dirty song in the fight scene between Colossus and Juggernaut, though. That was just heinous. But I think a big reason why I've put this one so much higher on the list than most of these others is just because I've seen it quite a bit, and I remember quite a bit of it, and enjoy a lot of it. So, yeah, it's going this high, even though most people probably wouldn't put it above X2 or First Class. I guess I am. Whatever. Sue me. Actually, don't. In the number 4 spot, and I think this is where I'm going to lose a lot of people, the Wolverine. Now, stop, relax. Again, remember, this is just my opinion. Go ahead and feel free to express yours, but personally, I have always really adored this film. I think James Mangold's an incredible director. I think this Wolverine film just had so much great action and a pretty solid story to carry it all together. Hugh Jackman's performance is just great as always. And it was nice to see a standalone Wolverine film that wasn't as bad as X-Men Origins Wolverine. We're dealing with Yakuza, we're dealing with Silver Samurai, we're dealing with Viper and Yukio and Mariko, and I don't know, it just, something about this just really works for me. I love the idea of Wolverine being in Nagasaki when the atom bomb was dropped on it. And there's something cool about him rescuing one of the Japanese soldiers who was not willing to kill himself over a war. I do find it funny how when Wolverine gets scorched by the atom bomb and he heals, all of his hair regrows in the same position, the same length that it was before he got torched. I don't know, I just find that amusing. I also need to mention that I did watch the Unleashed extended edition of this film. Now, it's considered unrated, but it is a lot more violent than the other one, basically pushing the limits of an R rating. Not only is the violence up, but we also do get more scenes of Wolverine in the bunker with Silver Samurai back in the 1940s during World War II. There's just more to his character in those scenes, him just being so, curious about Wolverine and how he's able to heal, and it kind of does explain more why he wanted Wolverine's power to save him from the illness affecting him. Wolverine losing his healing factor in this film adds stakes to his character as he's not able to heal as quickly, and he's having to rely on veterinary students and stitches and band-aids and stuff that he just doesn't have to deal with normally. And it keeps him from being just this unstoppable force taking out the Yakuza, because quite frankly, Wolverine versus the Yakuza on a good day when he's at full capacity, that's no question. But him with a depleted healing factor versus the Yakuza, now you got an interesting concept here. I think the train fight was probably my favorite scene in the entire film. And my favorite shot in this film that I just absolutely love is when he's flying at the guy with the claws popped right at the camera. Whoever came up with that idea, thank you for that, because I love that scene so much. Silver Samurai in the third act gets a little ridiculous as he kind of turns into a Transformers mech suit looking thing, but I don't hate it as much as other people do. Would it have been nice to actually see someone in a regular samurai armor and fight Wolverine? Yeah, I kind of would have preferred that, but I don't know. Hiroyuki Sanada, it's nice to see him. I've never disappointed seeing him on screen, so it's cool to have him in this film. Viper as a character, not a whole lot of backstory, kind of one of those villains that's just evil to be evil, but I did really appreciate all of her scenes and how she just kind of owned the room every time she had a dialogue sequence with someone. I will say, though, that is one of the fakest bald caps I've ever seen. But that's really not that big of a deal to me. What is a big deal is the fact that they cut out, even in the unrated cut, they cut out him cracking open that suitcase to look at the classic Wolverine suit. Why, Fox, why did you just not give that to us? What was holding you back? What would have been so bad about seeing him in Days of Future Past wearing the cowl and yellow and black suit? Give me one reason. Alright, we're in the top 3, and in third place we have X-Men Days of Future Past. I did watch both X-Men Days of Future Past, the theatrical cut, and the Rogue cut, and I will say, the Rogue cut is the better version of the film. Much like the Wolverine and Deadpool 2, the alternate cuts are just better. They're a little bit longer, and maybe it's not like a life-changing experience for the film, but it does add a lot more just to boost that enjoyment level, and that's why I did want to rewatch every single alternate version of these films. The Rogue cut especially changes a lot of things. For one, we actually have Rogue in the film as opposed to the theatrical cut that completely ignored her until that last 5 seconds. Also, it gave the 2023 team something to do. And I mean, yeah, you had Storm and Bishop and all those other guys taking on Sentinels the whole time to protect the place while Kitty Pryde was doing her thing. This time, Magneto and Iceman actually go on a mission after Kitty Pryde gets hurt to go find Rogue so she can come in and basically do exactly what Kitty Pryde was doing. And yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Not only did it give us an alternate death scene for Iceman and make him have an even more heroic death than he did initially, but we also get a reason as to why you loaded the gun that was Wolverine slashing Kitty Pryde and injuring her. When you load a gun in a movie, you need to fire it. And the fact that in the theatrical cut she gets scratched and it literally means nothing, why even bother showing that sequence? But when you bring in Rogue to replace her, okay, that ups the stakes. Now we need to pursue that objective and find a solution to this problem. Enter Rogue. And in my opinion, I thought it was pretty cool. You got to use an X-Men character who kind of got shafted in the last film she showed up in, and she played a pivotal role in the story while also not overtaking it. It made sense. Anyway, this film overall, regardless of whatever cut you watch, is really, really cool. The dystopian aspect of this story where the Sentinels have taken over and are just extinguishing mutants and locking them up left and right is so cool. And when you apply it to the X-Men and have them actually operating as a unit that has been doing this for a very long time, they're used to this, and we just get to kick back and watch them fight and just dominate the Sentinels while still struggling to take them on because the Sentinels are literally almost unstoppable. It's just really fun to watch in that opening sequence, and then again as the film goes on. Now, we don't really get as much with the 2023 timeline as I would have liked, but the film balances it out pretty evenly, I think, or at least in terms of what makes sense for the plot. The 1973 part is the main focus of the film, and I thought it worked really well. I loved seeing Logan go back in time and interact with the older versions of Beast and Professor X and Magneto and what have you. The Quicksilver fight scene where he's running around and he's in slow motion, that was really, really cool. Mystique is, of course, the most important she's ever been in any of these films, and this would only just be detrimental to her character moving forward because even though they're trying to pretend like she's important, she's never really all that important to the plot, but because Jennifer Lawrence is playing the character, we have to keep her employed and keep her going, despite the fact that she doesn't even want to be here. However, in this film, she does actually care. She gives a really solid performance. The makeup still looks pretty decent, and the character overall is relevant and has pretty cool motivations. Magneto, again, using his powers to fire a gun that he's not even holding. Freaking awesome. This is a film I've always loved and I've always regarded as the best X-Men film. However, there are two films that I think are just that much better above this one. In the number 2 spot, we have Deadpool, and this is one of my favorite films of all time. It was the first ever R-rated film I got to see in the theater. I was 15 years old, and my friends and I thought, this is the greatest thing ever. I had been clamoring for a Deadpool movie for a very, very long time. The first time I was ever exposed to this character was by reading a couple of the comics, and then when I was 14, I think I got the video game where Nolan North played Deadpool, and ever since then I'd always been in love with the character. I absolutely adored this film when it came out. It was so awesome seeing Ryan Reynolds playing the character how he was meant to be portrayed the whole time. I'm glad that he was able to make the passion project he wanted to make. They had the best suit they could possibly come up with for him in this film. It wasn't a end-of-the-world stakes film. It was definitely smaller scale, had a modest budget, and for Tim Miller to make his directorial debut with one of the highest-grossing R-rated films of all time, career achievement and a half, I would say. He previously worked as a visual effects artist, directed numerous music videos, and because of his previous experience, he was able to stretch out the budget and make it so it was actually consistent from start to finish. I think there's a lot of stylistic shots in this film, a lot of slow-mo sequences that would even make Zack Snyder jealous. The way they did the backstory of how he got his powers, some would write off as a tonal inconsistency with the comedy aspects of the film, but I honestly think it added a serious element that the character needed just to balance out the film. That way it wasn't just a bunch of crude jokes and over-the-top violence. There was actually some emotional resonance and weight behind this, and it kind of shows that not only is Deadpool wearing a mask to cover up his, hideous scars, but also he's kind of just using this as a defense mechanism because he's afraid of what he actually is. There's a really nice parallel in there that I like. I also got to say I found Ajax to be a pretty compelling villain. Very personal attachment to the main character of Deadpool. And he wasn't like a dark reflection of Deadpool where he's trying to out-funny him or anything. He's a serious villain who's a total jerk, and Deadpool's trying to get his revenge. It's a classic revenge tale. It's pretty awesome. I really enjoy the soundtrack. I really enjoy the action. I enjoy the performances, the story, all of it. This is literally one of my top 10 favorite films of all time, so it had to be near the top of this list. In first place, king of this franchise is none other than Logan. I watched both Logan and the noir versions. Just gonna let you know right out of the gate, I'd never seen the noir version before, but I had it in my Blu-ray copy and I figured I'm watching all these other alternate versions, I might as well just watch this. The noir version, not as good as the color version. It's really cool seeing the black and white on some of the still shots or the dialogue sequences, but whenever the action kicks up and starts going into high gear, it's a lot better in color in my opinion. Overall, it's just a nice aesthetic to match the promo images that James Mangold was dropping before the film was released, but it's not really something that you need to watch because you're missing something if you haven't seen it. It's just a black and white version of the movie, that's really it. This film, if I'm being honest, was completely snubbed for an Oscar in many different categories. Hugh Jackman gives an all-time best performance in this role. Patrick Stewart gives an incredible supporting performance as well. The script was just so well handled. James Mangold had a beautiful director's vision for this. The score was really good. It's just such a crazy different direction for this franchise to take. This pseudo-Western Mad Max-ish dystopian future post Days of Future Past where all the X-Men except for Wolverine and Professor X are dead. On paper, I feel like I would have hated this film. Wolverine is a disheveled, decrepit, broken old man who just wants to die and is about to be upstaged by a brand new female version of him who is going to carry everything moving forward. It's a deconstructionist piece on mutants and Wolverine and shouldn't work at all, and yet I freaking love this movie. Why? Because it just works. It has heart. It has good writing. It has stakes. It has everything that a great film needs. And when they take characters like Luke Skywalker and Indiana Jones and try to do this to them, they completely failed so hard. Logan is also just a character who's always been, really cynical of everything. It made sense for his character. You weren't taking this sense of right hero who was morally justified and never compromised and turning him into a bitter old man who hates everything. You're taking a guy who was experimented on, tormented, had PTSD, did not have a happy upbringing at all or a peaceful life, and that's all he wants, and now he's inching ever so closer to death, but it just won't come, and so he's bitter because he doesn't know how much longer it's going to take, and because of his healing factor not holding him together, he's just miserable all the time. It makes sense why his character is in this state.
And it is better this way. Because I suck at this. Bad shit happens to people I care about. Understand me?
Daphne Keane was like 11 when she played Laura in this movie, and she freaking nailed it. For her debut to be this film, I mean, good job. You got lucky. It's a shame that they had to waste your talent in The Acolyte, but yeah, she was absolutely excellent in this film, which is really saying something considering she doesn't talk for the first half of it. She's like mute the whole time, so a lot of her performance relies on her facial expressions, and she does a really good job with that. And of course, I can't talk about this film without talking about the great send-off it gave to both Hugh Jackman as Wolverine and Professor X, played by Patrick Stewart. Both actors were giving it their all in these performances, and the send-off that each received was so emotional and just honestly perfect within this narrative.
Don't be what they made you. Oh, this is what it feels like.
And that final shot of Logan's grave where Laura takes the cross and turns it into an X as all the kids walk away, and then it immediately fades to black and Johnny Cash starts playing as the credits roll. I long for the day when I'm able to write a scene for a character's death that is that impactful, because without a doubt, that is a big reason of why I love this film so much, is just how well it treated the send-off to Wolverine in this franchise. And I'm really hoping that Deadpool and Wolverine doesn't completely botch it. And also, it makes me grateful that 20th Century Fox did have the rights to the X-Men at this time, because I can guarantee you if Disney had their mitts on this property, we would have never in a million years gotten this film. Alright, so there you have it. Every single X-Men film ranked. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking it out. I really appreciate you watching. And again, if you have a different rating, or if yours is very similar to mine, let me know down in the comments. I would love to check out what other people think of this franchise, as it's been a really long time since we've had anything in this continuity show up. And I don't think this franchise gets talked about quite enough. And let's hope that Deadpool can seamlessly transition into the MCU with this one, because I and a lot of people have been looking forward to this for a very long time, and for a while there we weren't sure we were going to get it, but the fact that it's actually happening, it's actually going to release, that gives me hope that it's going to be awesome, and we'll see what happens. I will have a review posted for that after it comes out, so stay tuned for that, but until then, God be with you, and take care.